Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to our very first session to this peer-to-peer summer series with New Bedford Creative. For those of you who don't know, my name is Jasmyn Baird. I am the Senior Creative Fellow with New Bedford Creative. So I'm really glad that you guys are all here today. So this series is geared to enrich, educate, and connect New Bedford creatives in our community. New Bedford is home of artists, entrepreneurs, change makers, etc. And so this session or this series is to embrace the pulse that makes New Bedford so unique, while also expanding our knowledge and our connections. So at this time, I do want to thank MassDevelopment, TDI, and also the Barr Foundation for funding this program. This session or this series is one component of a broader TDI Creative Cities Initiative, and it helps to boost art-based economic development. All right, we're good to go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Oh, don't know how to share my screen. There we go. Everyone can see that? All right. So just a couple quick disclosures. One, I have spent a lot of time on Zoom over the past 18 months, like everyone else, but not as a presenter. So it's my debut as a presenter. I'm very excited. Hopefully it goes well. Two, I have a very large dog that is currently sleeping, but if he starts barking, I apologize, but hopefully he doesn't. So yeah, just to get started, I don't feel like I've never done this before with it. Hang on one second. There we go. Okay, so just a little bit about myself. I have a master's degree in professional writing from UMass Dartmouth, and I've been writing and managing grants since about 2010, but very much so in the last probably 4 or 5 years. And then I'm currently the manager of grants and development for Coastal Foodshed, which is an organization in New Bedford. And I also consult and write grants for a number of local nonprofits in New Bedford, in the New Bedford area. So I do grant research, grant writing, grant management, and then some project and program development, to create the programs and projects that fit well within the grant parameters. So that's a little bit about me. So I was going to just talk pretty briefly. I was going to walk through the process of kind of how I go through finding grants, writing grants, and managing grants. And again, this is pretty if a lot of you have a lot of experience in grant writing, this is, I don't want to say it's basic, but it's pretty it's not very advanced level grant writing, I guess. I don't know if there's a thing with that, but just to set expectations. So grant finding. I'll admit Eva. All right. So there's kind of 5 main buckets of grant funding. There are federal grants, there are state grants, there are local, your municipalities put out grant funding sometimes, and then private foundations and corporate foundations. So federal, again, this is I have DOT, that's the Department of Transportation. That didn't take long. Hang on one second. I apologize, everyone. I'm sorry. So there's federal grants, and this is grants.gov I put as a reference. So there's the Department of Transportation, FEMA, the National Endowment of Arts. This is obviously not exhaustive. There are plenty of federal grants out there. And then state and local, you can find them on department websites. I kind of have this backwards. I put MDAR is the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. I use that a lot with local food, what we do. DOE, Department of Education, and then locally, CDBG. I don't know if you guys are familiar with these. This is Community Development Block Grants. This is what the city of New Bedford puts this out every year. And then CPA, Community Preservation Act funding. That is, I don't know if that's a national thing or if that's in Massachusetts. Towns can get buckets of money from, they do some kind of tax thing, and it goes into this Preservation Act, and they'll put out requests for proposals and give out money based on the requirements of that. And then private foundations, I'm using local examples, the Island Foundation, the South Coast Community Foundation. But again, that's not exhaustive at all. There's plenty of private foundations. And then corporate would be your banks. Local banks are actually a great resource. A lot of them have very simple application processes but they are a great resource. And then I put examples like Home Depot and Walmart. Another thing you can do is, and I do this, that you sign up for relevant newsletters. NB Creative puts out a great newsletter. I look at their newsletter whenever it comes through. They list a ton of grants that are open. And then I put like South Coast Community Foundation, same thing. If you get on their listserv, they'll let you know when grants are open. Again, I use the MDAR example because that's just very relevant to my work. And then the Mass Cultural Council. For a lot of you who are artists, the Mass Cultural Council is a great resource. They put out a lot of funding. And so again, to sign up for their newsletters, to just skim through real quick, see what grants are coming up. I spend a lot of time doing that. Another kind of like little tip, this probably doesn't sound good, but you can look at other similar organizations that do work similar to yours and look if they have their list of funders on their website. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they put up their sponsors and funders. And this is something I've done, and I've been able to find like, oh, okay, I've never heard of this foundation. Let me look into this foundation and see if they're a good fit, because they're obviously funding some kind of similar work. And this could be, an organization that's out in like Western Mass, but does similar work to what you do, or, in a different region or a different town. And then another tip is just, you can call local funders or other, call Jasmyn and ask if they know of potential grants that are out there. Local funders, or not local funders, but funders tend to talk to each other a lot. And this recently happened to me with a proposal that we weren't funded for it. But when I called and kind of asked for some like feedback, one of the recommendations that the woman gave me was to check out this other local foundation that she thought might be a good fit for the project we were looking for funding for. So this is just kind of just some like little tips or things that I do here and there. Things skipped up. All right, so this grant finding research piece, once you kind of have a foundation or funder that you think might be a good fit, read the guidelines. This is like one of those where you can't read it closely enough, and you probably can't read it enough times. I often, when I'm writing grants, I go back and forth a couple times just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything from the guidelines. Make sure your project is eligible and it fits their guidelines. Sometimes I run into like, oh, but they'll think our project is so great, they just need to read the proposal. And that's usually not the case. And you don't want to waste your time putting together a proposal for a funder that is not going to, be interested in funding your project. So this is a foundation in Massachusetts, the Richard and Susan Smith Family Foundation. And they list I just did a screenshot, obviously, just to give an example. But their priorities are health, medical, research, education, community giving, and the Jewish community. And then obviously within those buckets, they have more detail about what they fund within that. And then they list what all grantees must be. You must be tax exempt. You can use a fiscal sponsor. But then, this serving people in Greater Boston. And, the worst thing is when you find a grant that you fit all the buckets, but then it's like, we only fund in Boston, or we only fund Western Mass. Sometimes you can call up and say, hey, would you really not be interested in funding down here? You can always call and ask, but usually they're going to stick to whatever their eligibility guidelines are. And sometimes these, grantees must be, oops, sorry, someone's coming in, must be a municipality or a state. It depends on what they want to fund. And then, the same thing. This is a pretty standard list of what funders won't usually fund. And I think that has to do with like legalities around what they're allowed to fund. And then this last little line, like what we do not fund, we don't sponsor events, conferences, or meetings, and we don't buy tables at events. So again, right there, your project might fit all of the criteria as far as eligibility, but then you're trying to get funding to put together a conference, right? So it's off the bat, they're just saying, here's what we won't fund. All right, and then again, read as much about the funder as possible. The types of projects they fund. This is another just like, Sometimes they'll only fund programming costs. Sometimes they'll only fund capital expenses or equipment, or they'll fund general operating costs. And sometimes they break it down even more, like, you know, we'll fund general operating, but we're not paying for a vehicle for you, or whatever the thing is. FAQs are a great, they're a great tool. I find things in FAQs all the time that's not in the RFP, the request for proposals. So you can always glean some more information. And then the same thing, research, if they list their previously funded projects, you can look through those and see if you can get any other information from that. And this is from that Smith Foundation. This is just an example of a project they funded. So it's a capital grant to purchase a truck for critical transportation to put on this art festival. So again, it just shows you some examples of what they'll fund. And again, attend any webinars about it. If they put a webinar out, they tend to tell you something in the webinar that wasn't in the request for proposals. And then call the funder if possible. It never hurts to call and just say, hey, can I just talk about my project with you? This is what we're thinking. Do you have any thoughts on that? And then, I mean, sometimes they'll say, you know, we do not take calls, so don't call them if they don't take calls, but it doesn't hurt. And then they kind of know to look out for your proposal also. I don't know if you can hear that. This is like the perfect storm today. Can you hear that in the background? A little bit? Oh my God. I just have to laugh. Okay. This is a great resource that I use all the time. It's up at the top, this guidestar.org. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. GuideStar, it has a whole bunch of information about foundations, but the thing that I zero in on are the 990 forms. 990 forms are what foundations have to submit, I think, as part of their taxes. But it will show who they've funded and how much they've funded them. And you can create a free account on GuideStar and you can search foundations and you can look up these 990 forms. So I use them. Sometimes you'll come across a foundation, you'll hear about it, but you can't find any information about them on the web. And this Grimshaw Gudowitz is a perfect example of that. If you Googled them, it won't really come up with, it'll come up with like Charity Navigator and stuff, but they don't have a website that says, here's what we fund. So you can go into their 990 and look them up. And this first part just kind of shows, I don't know if you guys can see this. I don't know if it's too small or anything. But the one that I circled with the red circle, this talks about if the foundation makes contributions to unsolicited proposals, basically. And sometimes if this is checked off, this is like a no-go. They want an invitation only, like they'll invite people to write proposals. So if you send them a proposal, it's just a waste of time again. And then it shows, but this one is not checked off. So you could apply to this if you fit the criteria they're looking for. And then they show you, okay, here's how you do it. You need to send it to this woman in New Bedford. And then they have, you know, the form, how the application, that box B, a letter indicating the purpose of which the funds requested, accompanied by a copy of the federal exemption letter and evidence that your organization is in good standing. They don't have any submission deadlines. That's always exciting, right? No deadlines. And then I won't read that verbatim, but they talk about where what types of thing they want to fund. So they're looking in geographical areas of Bristol County, Mass, nearby in Rhode Island, and Peterborough, New Hampshire. And then they generally target their giving to the arts, education, and especially those that enhance business and entrepreneurial skills, healthcare, and the preservation of local culture. So again, it gives you what, you know, the gist of what you're looking for. And that, again, you just need to send in a letter kind of touching upon that. And then this slide just shows, this is just a screenshot of a little bit. There's far more than this, but just shows you who they've funded and how much they've funded them. So this is always a great, and 990s, the other reason I go into 990s is if an organization, if the foundation has lots of information, but they don't really have information about what they've funded, and you're like, what do I ask for? Like $5,000 or like $50,000, right? You can go in and see how much they fund and then get a good idea, right? So these people, if you sent them a proposal asking for like $100,000, they most likely would not entertain that. But so it gives you an idea of how much to ask for. All right, should I stop and ask? I don't know if I should stop and ask any questions on grant research or just keep going into grant writing. I just keep going. All right, grant writing. All right, so again, reading the full application process. The first thing I do when I find a new grant that I've like checked all the boxes on eligibility and I know our program is going to be eligible and we can apply to it, the first thing I do is I write, okay, what's the deadline? Make sure you know the date and the time. Sometimes funders want things by 5 p.m. Sometimes they want things by 3 p.m. So just double check that you know when it needs to be handed in by. The submission process. Most things nowadays are either, you email it or you do it through a grant portal. But every once in a while, I will see one, and I actually have one coming up that has to be mailed or it has to be a hard copy, has to be dropped off. So obviously, the emailed ones you can finish up at 9 p.m. before it's due, but you can't do that with a hard copy. So it's just making sure you know when you need to get it done by. And grant portals, I would like sign up as soon as possible. Don't wait until the last minute. The number of times that I've run into technical difficulties with trying to get into a grant portal is frequent enough that I don't wait until the last minute. The application questions and outline. So this is just, take it for what it's worth. This is how I do it. I either pull it into like a Word doc or into Google Drive, into Google Doc. And I pull all the questions out, like everything, even if it just says like, what's the title of the project, pull out the questions, just so I have it outlined so I can start working on it. And then attachments are another big one to pay attention to. Do they want your budget? Do they want audited financials, resumes, bios? These are the kinds of things that's like you finish the proposal and you're like, yay. And then you look back and you're like, oh God, I have to put together all this other information that I didn't realize. And letters of support is another one that can take some time because you have to wait for it to come back from whoever you're asking for the letter of support from. And then templates, this is just a note on templates. Obviously use their templates if they say they're required, but even if they say that they're just like a suggested template, I always use it, even if they say it's a suggested template, because it's just, obviously that's the format they want it in. So it's kind of just like a little tip. And then just note any other stipulations. Is it a reimbursement based grant? I actually had a grant that my organization is Coastal Foodshed. We couldn't apply to this past year because it was reimbursement based, and we couldn't upfront the capital. That it was just too much capital to front on the award. So sometimes that can be a big problem. Match requirements. This is like usually like a federal and state. They want to see that you're invested in the project also. So they might ask for a 20% match and they'll pay for 80% of the project. And you have to be able to show how you're going to do that. And like just an asterisk on that. Sometimes it's cash, sometimes it's in-kind money. It just depends. You just have to read and make sure that you can fulfill those match requirements. And then timeline requirements. This is a funny one because it's one of those that like you'll think of like later, but make sure you know when they're planning on funding the project. Sometimes people are like, well, we need the money like next month. And I'm like, well, they're not going to award these grants until, the end of December. So you want to know when they're going to award the grants, because when you're putting in a timeline, you also don't want to, you don't want to miss that they said we're going to award the grants in December and you've got the work starting in September kind of thing. So just another thing. And then this is more with like state grants and stuff, but when does the money need to be spent down by? That's another thing. So make sure your project can fit in the parameters of their timeline. And I just have a note down here, can't receive funding for costs already spent. That is just, you don't ever want to spend any money, even if they say, hey, we're going to fund your proposal, they send you an email and then you go out and you like buy the thing. That's a really tricky, especially with state and federal funding. They will not reimburse you. They will not pay for anything that you've spent before the grant period. So just make sure that you, and I kind of touch on this again later, but that you have a signed contract, a signed award letter that says, hey, you're getting this money, spend it, or a check that you can spend the money. So you don't, obviously spend money that you then can't get back. So I just put, this is an example of, I feel like I missed a slide. Oh, maybe not. This is pulled from the Island Foundation. Just obviously is an example of reading everything about what they want. So this, they pulled, how do I apply to the Island Foundation? It's a two-step process, but they say, call them first, either call or write to the foundation, and then they will determine whether or not they want you to send in a letter of inquiry or a full proposal. So then they will send you the information if they want it. And then this is kind of just, again, to give an example of what they're looking for, a one-page cover letter, and it tells you what to put in that cover letter, 3 to 5 pages with a brief history. So I would take this and I would create a Google Doc, and I would have the heading brief history, project need, project goals, methods used to meet your goals, measures of success, and qualifications of your organization and staff. I wouldn't try to get fancy. I want them to clearly be able to see, here's the information you're looking for, and only the information you're looking for. A project budget, the most recent financial statement or audit, your list of board of directors and staff, your IRS determination letter, and then supplementary, or if you have a fiscal sponsor, and then supplementary materials. And then they give their deadlines for when their proposals are due. So this is pretty, well, I shouldn't say it's standard. They're all different, but usually the same kind of stuff. All right, grant writing checklist. And I actually made you guys a checklist, like an actual checklist that I can send to Jasmyn afterwards if she can send out to you guys. And it's a checklist that I use almost every time I write a grant. Even though all grants have different questions, you still want to kind of touch upon these main points in your grants. And I should say though, I mean, obviously if you're trying to shove it into somewhere where it doesn't fit, don't do that. But I'm just saying in general, this is kind of proposal writing. So demonstrating a clear need is what is the gap in services? What's the community need that you are meeting? And then if you can back that up with any relevant data and statistics whenever possible. I go on to, I'm trying to think of I go into reports or I go into census data and just always try, it's kind of that 8th grade research paper of I'm not the professional. Here's what the professionals say. This is why you should fund this. And actually I pulled right down here, this little box is from New Bedford Creative's Arts and Culture Plan, I think it's called, from 2018. And I can't read it all the way because it's covered up, but it gives you examples of where you could pull that information. You could say, see, the New Bedford Creative's Arts and Culture Plan says we need X, Y, and Z, and that's what we want to do. So we're meeting the priorities that they have outlined. And so we can do that whenever possible. Provide a clear scope of your work. What are you going to do? What is the plan? And that should, again, clear is like the magic word. It very simple writing, right? We are going to provide swim lessons to 100 children in New Bedford Public Schools. I am going to paint a public mural on this building in New Bedford. Just very they need to walk away and know exactly what it is that you are trying to do with the funding. Define the impact the project will have. The kids will be able to swim. They'll be safer. That's a horrible example, but I can't think of a better example off the top of my head. And then use your own organization statistics and data. Anytime you can collect your own data, I always recommend this. If you have enrollment numbers, if you're an artist and you've done X number of public murals, participant demographics, anything that you can collect, because then you can refer to it in grant proposals going forward. You or your organization's credentials and ability to meet this need or demand. So again, the toughest one is when you're starting out in this world and you don't have that much to back you up, but you just point to why your organization or why you, the individual, is best prepared to do this work. And then present a clear and realistic budget. Realistic, when I say that, I mean, if you are an organization that has an operating budget of $100,000, you're not really going to go around asking people for another $100,000. Or if the overall program costs $10,000, you're not going to ask for $30,000. So just make sure it's realistic. And the same thing with the timeline. I see this a lot of times with like construction. People are like, oh yeah, we'll build that thing in like a month. And I'm like, no, you won't build it in a month. You make sure that it makes sense. Or the same thing with a program. I put together a timeline that was to hire someone new, it was to implement a program and we had to hire someone. So, it was like thinking out, okay, how long is it going to take us to advertise this person or I'm sorry, for the position? How long is it going to take us to find the person? How long is it going to take us to onboard the person, right? So it wasn't just like, we'll get the money in March and we'll immediately start the work. There was some preliminary stuff that had to be put into that timeline. So just, again, think it through of what the pieces look like. And then, is it sustainable and or scalable? Sustainability, funders love to ask this question. How are you going to sustain this program beyond us funding it? And oftentimes this can be, a mixture of like, we're looking for other donations from individual donors, or we're gonna charge a ticket price to enter, so we have some revenue coming in, things like that. But just show that there's a diverse revenue sources coming in, and that you're not just like, well, no, we're gonna ask you for the money every single year until the end of time. Although some funders do fund things for a long time. And then scalable. Can you replicate this somewhere? Can you grow the program to reach more kids or more people down the road? That's always something good too, because you want to grow your impact, right? You want to reach more of your target audience. And then the who, what, when, where, and how. This I have to add in because I literally do this almost every time I write a proposal. This is like, I think they teach you this in like 8th grade journalism. I don't even know, but just going back to, okay, did I cover who is implementing the program? Did I tell them what the program is going to be? Did I tell them when the program is going to be, where it's going to be, and how we're going to do it? And it sounds silly, but the number of times that I've been like, oh my God, I didn't tell them that it's in New Bedford, or, whatever, that it pulls you back out of it to like, look at everything you've written to make sure it's all clear. And then just some other application tips or grant writing tips. Again, follow the application as presented in all guidelines. Sometimes they'll have specific fonts that they want you to use, the size of the font. You can't go past 5 pages. You can't go past 15 pages. Just always follow their guidelines and follow the order of their things. I actually once got a debrief from I think it was a federal grant that I applied for, and they said, listen, you kind of move the order of this around. Don't move the order around. And I was like, oh God, okay. So that's why I say that now. So don't move the order around. Know your audience. This I put in here because it's kind of like, I feel like this is like, there's 2 sides to it. Usually it's more that you should write to someone who they don't know anything about what your work is, right? So you want to write to them and explain things to them, not in a like condescending way, but this is just explaining it more than just assuming they understand everything about your project and the work that you do. Because review panels are often made up of very different people from very different backgrounds, and they might not know what you're talking about. And that the flip side, I say, is like, if you're someone who's writing to like the NIH, like scientific proposals, that's a whole different like ball game, right? Like those people very much know the science that you're talking about. So you would use a different type of language. And again, back to that, I kind of highlighted that again, use a simple language, but again, based on your audience, who is reading this proposal. Brevity is key. I always laugh that I'm the daughter of a retired English teacher, so I can say things like this, but I feel in high school English, it's like, it's the whole, like, they told me to write 5 paragraphs on this, but I don't know what else to write after 2 paragraphs. So you try to like jam in another few paragraphs to like meet the requirement. Don't do that in grant writing. You just answer the question and try to answer as simply and like clearly as possible. Because again, these reviewers are often reading dozens of proposals. So to go through, just tons of like fluff and language it's not, nobody wants to read that, right? I don't know if that's enjoyable to anybody. Weave their language into the proposal. This is just kind of like, and everyone knows in their own industry kind of like what the buzzwords are, kind of like the trending words. But I often, from the request for proposal, if they call something a certain thing, I make sure I call it that certain thing, right? So that they can say like, okay, they're understanding what we're looking for, they're matching up with what we're looking for. So that's another little thing. Use bulleted lists. I love bulleted lists. Sometimes page requirements get in the way of this, and I end up writing horrible blocks of text that look horrible to read. But if you can get bulleted lists in, this is just, again, it's better on the eyes. Write short paragraphs. Again, you got to watch out for page limits, but breaking up paragraphs so that you have, to the next point, more white space, it just makes it easier for someone to read. And again, when they're reading dozens of these, it's just, you can get to your point made and make it easier on the reviewers. This is just a nod to drafting letters of support for partners. If you're required to submit letters of support, you should always draft the letter of support. So if I was going to ask Margot for a letter of support, I would draft it up, because Margot doesn't know what I'm applying for, right? But I would draft it up, and then I would say, hey, Margot, here's this letter, would you sign on? And you can edit it any way you want. I mean, they can change it around. They don't have to keep the language. But instead of asking someone to write a letter of support from scratch, it's just a nicer thing to do, because they don't know what you're applying for. They don't know all the details. And then opportunities to collaborate. Foundations just love to see when people partner and get together and collaborate. And I shouldn't just say foundations. Federal funders love this. State funders love this. Not that you always have to, but if there's an opportunity, it's always good. Not duplicating similar projects and programs. This is just something to be aware of. There are a lot of organizations in New Bedford or wherever you are. I'm sure there's a lot of organizations, and you just want to make sure, because these funders, like the Island Foundation would be a perfect example, they're seeing proposals from dozens of New Bedford organizations. So they want to make sure that you're not all basically asking for the same thing, because that's to the nod of hey, you guys need to get together and collaborate. We don't want to pay each of you to do the same thing, right? I mean, unless it's obviously a service that just, there needs to be more of it to serve the residents. And then the last one is just think of when you're writing, think about how you, if someone was asking you to give them money for their project, what would you want to know about it, right? Why would you want to donate to this organization? So it's just kind of to just put that perspective of I would really want them to know this thing or this thing. Just another thought on it. All right, and then the last piece is just grant management. And I have to throw this in here because unfortunately it does not end when you write the grant and get the approval letter. The grant management piece, yay, you got the money, but now you have to actually implement the project, right? I say just send a thank you letter, a thank you card. It's just a nice thing to do. Write down all reporting deadlines and requirements. Just get them on your calendar, because this is, if you want to apply for them, apply to the same foundation again, you want to make sure that you've managed their money well and that you've kept them up, you've done the project correctly. It's just gonna make it look better for a future request. So just make sure you fulfill any of those reporting requirements. And I mean, that could be, I have reporting requirements that are hey, send us some pictures when it's over. I'm okay, great. So just make sure you send the pictures. Keep in contact with the funder. Most funders are very, very flexible and very, very good to talk to. I don't know if I've ever worked on a project that has been implemented exactly the way it was put into the proposal, but you just call, you say, hey, this ended up costing less than we thought it was going to. Can we use this money to do, X, Y, or Z? Or, hey, this is taking longer. We just want to let you know these are the things we're doing to try to get it figured out. And solve the problem, but just keep in touch with them. You don't want to surprise them at the end of the project, oh, hey, we weren't ever able to do that because we couldn't hire someone, right? That's not good. Create a data tracking system. This is kind of, this is back to the collecting your own data, even without a grant requirement. Again, it's just good to keep any kind of data you can keep on your own program or work, just because, again, you can refer back to it. And again, the note about not spending any money until you have signed a contract, you've got an award letter, you've gotten a check, and someone has given you the green light to spend money. And then just follow up and build the relationship with the funder, which can never hurt. And then That's my cute emoji. Boo, you didn't get the money. Follow up with the funder and ask for a debrief and feedback on your proposal. I'm actually in the middle of scheduling one of these right now on a proposal that I didn't get funded. I want to get their comments. I want to hear their feedback. Sometimes it's very helpful. Sometimes it's like, listen, we just didn't have enough money. Your proposal was fine, but we didn't have enough money to fund everyone, which is, that one's always frustrating to hear, but I guess that's better than like, your proposal was horrible, so we didn't fund it. And then just try again. The Coastal Foodshed, we just applied. It was our third time applying to a certain foundation, and we finally got into the final round, but then we didn't end up getting it again. But it was still, we had gotten one step closer than we had the last 2 years. So that's kind of my whole spiel. So that's it. Questions?
Thank you, Abby.
You are welcome.
Yay.